topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon. Orlando, the beautiful city of Orlando, where we here in Florida are about to get some of the coldest weather we've ever received over the next 2, 3, 4 days. You see all this major snowstorms. We don't get much snow down here in South Florida and in Central Florida, but we're sure going to be getting some cold weather. Hey, we're so glad you joined us today. Hey, by the numbers we're seeing on YouTube, they just keep climbing and climbing. And this is the last Thursday of the month, so that means K. Bender Rimbaum. And it seems like it's been a year since we've seen our old buddy Alan. Let me change that. Board certified attorney Alan Swartzide. Hey, good afternoon, bro.
Glad to be back. I do feel like it's been a year, and if you want to use a dad joke, it's literally been since last year.
Yeah, it's true. That's exactly true. Well, you're all busy doing these free seminars and classes, and I'm looking at the calendar. We've got February and March in the calendar, which we'll be talking about. But, hey, it's good to see you. Happy New Year.
Likewise. It's like I said, it's been a while, but it's good to be back. It's been, as you mentioned, I'm sitting here freezing a little bit, but you know what? That's okay. It only happens. We get our, 2 weeks a year of winter, and yes. I guess we have to suffer through it. I will say, since we last spoke, I've learned how to turn my defroster on in my car for the first time in my life.
That's funny. That's funny. Hey, listen, we've got all these questions over the last month and a half. Do you think you still remember everything about the law when it comes to community association?
Well, here's the thing, Steve. You got a break from me, but I didn't get a break from the work. So I hope I still remember it because I've been doing it this whole time.
You know what? He always one-ups me. Always. That's why I like doing a show with him. So, Alan, tell everybody about K. Bender Rimbaum.
Sure. Well, we're a firm of 20, I think it's 25 attorneys now, 9, including myself, board certified in representing community associations and dealing with condo and HOA issues, 1 board certified in construction. So essentially anything related to community associations, that's what we do. And that's all we do. Jeff Rembaum and I have a mediation practice that is related to the firm and primarily represent or work with community associations in that aspect. So I won't say represent because we're unbiased when it comes to that. But, it's a little bit of everything, but a little bit of everything in a very small area of law, just community association representation. And so, if you're happy with whoever you're working with as counsel, stick with them, no problem. But if you're not happy with them or you just don't have an attorney, I hope you'll reach out. I don't want to take too much time because we want to get to the questions, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the firm a little bit.
Hey, we love talking about the firm. The firm has been with this show for 12 years. That is amazing. And we just signed a new agreement, and you're going to be here all next year also. So
yes,
this
sir.
It's such an easy show to do, Alan. It is because, first of all, the participation we get from listeners and viewers, but it's also the way you communicate with the listeners and viewers. And I'm not sucking up. You do such a good job. You make the show go by so fast, and I'm just so glad. The other day, I asked Kirsten, we do our Tampa show with Kirsten. I'm going to ask you the same show. So some new laws went into effect the first of the year, but tell me some of the biggest questions people are asking now after the first of the year.
Well, we're starting to hear about the new legislation that might be coming down the pike. And, most of the laws that took effect for HOAs and condos and management firms in particular, they all took effect in July. There's not a ton that took effect for HOAs, condos, co-ops, and for community association managers that actually took effect on January 1st. But what we're hearing are, there's a legislator out there now that wants to make it very ridiculously easy to terminate an HOA. We've already got a mechanism for condos, and it works to some extent, but they want to make it where it's only 50% or a majority of the members that can say, yeah, we don't like this, we're done with it. Well, that doesn't really work. So, it's kind of like where everyone is saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be paying property taxes. Okay, but where is that going to come from? The things that are paid for with the property taxes. Listen, not to get political, I'm a libertarian. I am all in favor of getting rid of those taxes, but the money's got to come from somewhere to support the education, right, to support the infrastructure. So if it comes from somewhere else, that's fine. But it's similar when it comes to this HOA termination bill. If you want to do away with the HOA, that's fine. Who's going to maintain the drainage areas? Who's going to maintain the property? Are you going to have the municipality telling people what they can and can't do? Or does it now become a free-for-all for that particular area because the municipal government never tried to control that area once this HOA was formed? Are you going to be required to replace it with something that is adjacent to an HOA and still has covenants, but doesn't require a payout or a pay-in? A lot of these questions are answered in the proposed legislation. They're not answered very well, in my opinion. And, that's the biggest issue that I'm getting asked about. I actually was at a CAI meeting today where I was the speaker on a legal update. So it's exactly what you're asking about, Steve. And the biggest question was not what did they do to us last year? It's what are they trying to do to us this year? So that's the biggest question I generally get, especially around this time of year where the legislature's in session. And, it's funny, I mentioned today, and I'll mention it again on the air, one of my favorite professor in law schools, his favorite lines and his most famous line was, "Nothing is safe when the legislature is in session." And we've seen that constantly over the last few years with, how we see the legislature panning out and the things that do get adopted, some of which make no sense, some of which are a great idea, but a lot of it is just clearly not run by attorneys or community association managers that practice in this area before it's proposed, voted on, and adopted. So that was a lot of words to say. The things people are asking about are mostly, what are they doing to us this year? And honestly, unfortunately, I can't answer that until we have a little bit deeper knowledge into the legislative session. We're not quite there yet.
So, Alan, I want to share something with you. I didn't do it with Kirsten, but I wanted to save it for this show. So we do shows all over the country. We do a lot of shows in Texas, New York, California. So they have high rises there. We have HOA shows in those states, like we do here. And I found out that none of them really learned a lesson from Surfside, Alan. They don't have the regulations and law that we have here now.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, a lot of people are not learning from it. The problem is that a lot of the legislation, in my opinion, that's been put in place doesn't really serve the function. And we've talked about this even on the show almost ad nauseum, regardless of what other discussions I've had about the issue. But, the structural integrity reserve studies, I don't see how they're necessary. You get the milestone inspection report. If there's a problem, you take care of it. If there's not, you don't. How is that not enough? So you're right. A lot of other states are not seeing the problem and not taking it as seriously as the legislation has in Florida. I think that's problematic because I think this is an issue that could come up anywhere. It's just that I think, and I haven't done a deep dive into other jurisdictions to determine whether they've got hey, every X amount of years, you need to check the building to make sure it's safe. I wonder whether some of those states have HOA directors who are paid and professional and know what they're doing beyond taking a board certification class and maybe another class or two, hopefully listening to radio shows like ours, etc. But for the most part, I don't think there's anyone else that's really taking that issue as seriously. Hopefully there are local requirements, kind of like there are in some jurisdictions in Florida. Like I know Broward County, I think Orange County, Miami-Dade, they all have their recertification restrictions. And those are similar to a milestone inspection. Hopefully everyone's doing that. That's not doing anything else about the building collapse, because you're absolutely right in implying that it could happen anywhere. And if you're not doing anything to protect it and you know that it's a possibility, that's a little bit frightening. Now, hopefully the individual HOA and condo directors are doing something about it, but obviously I don't know what they're doing because I'm not there.
Let's go to our chat line and start off with Dennis. Concerning the condo website, how many years of financial information has to be on the site? Current only or back how many years? Also for agendas and minutes, etc.
So the meeting minutes, I'm pretty sure it's 1 year. The agendas, same thing. And then the financials, I believe, is 7 years. But don't quote me on that one. But the other two are definitely 1 year. So it's either 7 or 1, but I'm pretty sure it's 7. And some of this stuff, don't forget, just because you don't have to have it on the website doesn't mean you won't have to maintain it indefinitely on a permanent basis.
Okay. Let's go to Jack in Winter Park. In a HOA, is a 2/3 or major vote required for changing gate operations from 12 hours to 24 hours?
Probably not. That's not an amendment. So I don't know where the idea that would be required might have come from, unless there's something very specific in your governing documents that talks about the gate and the hours of operation. That would be a board decision to change from 12 to 24. Hopefully there's another way to get in if the gate's not in operation during the other 12 hours of the day. But, generally speaking, there's nothing that's statutory that would talk about that particular issue. So I would suggest your governing documents.
This reminded me, I lived in the Highland Beach area on the ocean there in a high rise. And they had a armed guard with a gate down for the first 12 hours of the day. The second 12 hours of the day, no guard and gate up. I never understood why they would do something like that.
Yeah, that seems like the opposite of logic. You would think that the protection is more necessary at night than during the day, but yeah, I'm missing something.
Well, I'm surprised they didn't do it the full 24 hours.
Right. I mean, that's what a lot of communities do, and they'll make it more like my parents' community. They make it more difficult to get in. You have to actually show ID regardless of who you are after a certain time, and that's fine. Or they won't go by the list. But I'm not sure I understand what the rationale behind what you're describing would have been. But
yeah,
again, board decision, unless your governing documents specifically say otherwise. And I will say I've never seen a set of governing documents that was that specific on the hours of operation of the gate.
Let's go to Cindy in Orlando. She is a board member. I'm currently on a board president is paid deposits on a $32,000 non-budgeted project. The work has already begun. The project has never been opened up for discussion at the board meeting, allowed owners an opportunity for input, or had a voice in approval by the board. Nowhere in the governing documents is this addressed.
Okay, well, I'm not sure there was a question there, but I'll do my best to interpret it.
It sounds like maybe.
Yeah, what is this okay? Sounds like a question. And, spending money that's not in the budget is generally problematic unless the association needs to spend the money. Now, it may not be a specific budgeted item, but it might be covered in one of the categories of what's in the budget. So the fact that there's expenditure that's not directly addressed in the budget isn't fatal to this situation. The board has the obligation to properly operate and maintain the community up to the standards set in the declaration. So the fact that someone is spending money on something that an individual doesn't interpret as being authorized in the budget doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% wrong. Now, as to not having it discussed at an open board meeting, I can't speak to what they might have done instead. Obviously, the statutes are very clear. Voting via email is not allowed. They might choose to ratify the decision later on. That's not supposed to be the end-all, be-all solution for everything, but it is something that's done throughout Florida. The alternative is you might do a records inspection request to see if there's a unanimous written consent in the official records, which is basically a resolution signed by all the directors to say, we understand that this is work that needs to be done. We don't have a choice but to do it. So we're just going to approve it and we're not going to do it at a board meeting. Again, I would use that sparingly, but it is something that's authorized unless your governing documents say that it's prohibited under Chapter 617 of the Florida statutes, which is the Not-for-Profit Act. So the other thing that I would consider is, was this an emergency that the work needed to be done? Now, the board might have a different perspective on what qualifies as an emergency than the owner that's asking this question. I can't be the judge of that because I don't know the circumstances. I don't even know what the expense was based on the question. But I will say that there are circumstances where this could be okay, but I would suggest looking deeper into it because it's absolutely feasible that this director shouldn't have done what they're doing, or at least shouldn't have done it in the way that they're doing it. And the fact that the members weren't given the opportunity to at least know what's going on is somewhat problematic. But again, if this was done on an emergency basis or via resolution of all of the directors unanimously, it might be okay. But I would just look deeper into it and find out what documentation is out there to see what really happened versus the perception of, well, I didn't hear about a notice or a board meeting or an agenda where this was supposed to be discussed. It may be that you missed the notice because it was only posted. So I'm not suggesting that this particular board is doing everything perfectly, but I would look deeper into it and maybe send a records inspection request for, you can ask to see all records, but if you want to be easier on the association, just specify that you're looking for records pertaining to this specific contract.
Rick, in Fairview Shores, the state statute gives new board members 90 days to complete the 4-hour certification, but it does not give any timeline for the 4-hour annual training in existing board members. Is there a limit?
Steve, you froze up for a second there, but I understand the question. So I'm presuming based on the timelines and the number of credits you mentioned that you're talking about an HOA rather than a condo, because that's where you get 4 years. And if you're 2,500 lots or under 2,500 lots, you need 4 credit hours throughout the course of the year. Now, the problem is the legislature didn't clarify whether that year starts when the statute required it, which would be July 1st to June 30th, whether it's 1 year annually from the date that you were first certified or 1 year from the date that you became a director. There's really no clarity on that point. So my perspective has always been, if you do it from the dates of the statute, meaning July 1st to June 30th of the following year, you should always be safe versus trying to figure out when does my timeline start and finish. The Florida Bar does that to attorneys. I don't think the legislature intended to do it to individuals who are volunteering for this position. Now, I say that, but I will facetiously add, they do a lot of other things to people who are volunteering, so maybe they did intend for this to be overly complicated to calculate. But to be safe, my suggestion would be start calculating based on July 1st. Even if you start in January, get it done by June 30th. These are educational programs. It's never going to hurt to have to do an extra few. I understand it takes time out of your day. I also understand if you're in a larger community of 2,500 lots or more, you actually have an 8-hour requirement per year. But if you're going to volunteer to be on the board and make decisions for these large communities or any community, my perspective is you should be willing to ensure that you can spend the 4 hours a year to get this done.
Hey, I'm sorry about the freezing going on today, but hey, it happens sometimes with live shows. This is Shelley in Pine Hills. For HOA Board required annual training, she wants to know, does your firm offer any training that quality for the you?
So again, Steve, I'm sorry, your connection's not great, but I think the question is whether our firm offers these HOA and condo classes that we're talking about here, and the answer is yes. I know we have at least one coming up in February. It's still January, so expect that some will be added, and we'll get into some of the classes that we're teaching later on. But yes, absolutely. The answer is I think we've got 10 different classes, maybe even more, that are authorized for that specific HOA certification beyond what we have that we can offer to CAMs. And then on top of that, if you're in a condo, you only have one continuing education class, which is a legal update. We're also authorized to teach that class. And I think we've got one coming up in maybe February 16th. Yeah, we've got one coming up, but that one's in person. I think we've got another legal update coming up. And frankly, I just taught one for CAI just today in person. So we do have those classes. I know there are some other providers, some charge for these classes, some don't. We do not, unless you are going to an event where the vendor that's running the event is going to charge you for it. But we don't charge for any of our classes, and that's whether you're a client or not.
I think I'm going to do is we're going to have you tell us about your seminars coming up.
Sure.
And we'll go to a break, and while we're on break, I'm going to try to come back in again one. So let's go to your classes first.
All right. Well, on January 30th, Danielle Brennan in our Palm Beach Gardens office is doing a webinar. It's a HOA board member certification class. So if you haven't done that within your 90 days, it's time to get it done. I know there are a couple people that are definitely going to that are looking to make sure that they stay on the board. We have a legal update for CAMs and condo board members that I just mentioned, and that's on February 13th. That's a webinar as well, and you might know the guy that's teaching it. It's me. We've also got an HOA board certification class, a condo legal update, and an updating your governing documents class at the Trails of Ormond Beach. That's going to be hosted by Real Manage on February 16th. I'll be the educator for all of those classes. We've got elections for community associations coming up. That is also for HOA board members. That's on February 25th, and Kirsten from our Tampa office will be teaching that one. We have the Southern States Management Annual HOA Conference at the Brevard Zoo. Was just there today. It's a beautiful venue. That's on Thursday, February 26th. I'll be teaching a covenant enforcement class while that's going on, but that's from 9 to 3. And there will be a bunch of different vendors there that you can interact with and ask questions and do what you got to do. And then finally, I say finally, but this is definitely not all the classes we've got coming up next month. We've got your governing document updates webinar on February 27th. That's Emily Gannon from our Pompano office is going to be teaching. So we've got a bunch coming up. I'm looking forward to all the ones I'm teaching because they're really good classes, really good events that I'm looking forward to. And hopefully we'll see some of you there. Steve, if you want to go to break, hopefully we'll have a better connection, but I'm glad I was able to at least figure out what you're asking me.
Let's go to our break one. I'm going to come back in. Thanks. We'll be right back.
K. Bender Rembaum is a full-service community association law firm dedicated to the representation of community associations throughout Florida. On kbrlegal.com, you can learn more about their offices in Pompano Beach, Palm Beach Gardens, Orlando, Tampa, as well as throughout Miami-Dade by appointment. Several K. Bender Rembaum attorneys are board-certified specialists in condominium and plan development law and assist clients with all matters of community association legal issues while keeping them up to date on new developments that affect their associations. K. Bender Rembaum is also a well-known provider of free legal education for managers and board members. Contact K. Bender Rembaum today by calling 800-974-0680. That's 800-974-0680 to reach any of their locations. You can also visit them online at kbrlegal.com or write to them at info@kbrlegal.com.
And we are back with the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV with your hosts, Steve-O, Sophia, and their expert guests.
And we are back. I hope this is better. I don't know. Once in a while, this does happen. Alan, tell people how they can reach your office.
Well, the easiest way to get to me, because I can check it whenever and wherever, is my email, as@kbrlegal.com. And again, that's AS as in Schwartzide at KB as in Bender, R legal.com. The other way to get to us is calling our front desk, which will reach any of our 4 offices, which are in Pompano Beach, Palm Beach Gardens, the one I have here in Winter Springs in Orlando area, and Tampa. And that's 954-928-0680 or 1-800-974-0680.
Okay. Going back to the chat line, can an HOA that was self-managed previously keep association records at a board home once they have transitioned to having a management company?
Well, the question is, can they? The answer is yes, but whether it's a good idea, the answer is probably not. And here's the reason. Once they get that records inspection request from an owner, they've only got 10 business days to produce those records in the manner that they're kept. So if they're kept in the person's home, I'm not suggesting that you need to produce them in the person's home, but to get them to the manager to compile all the records the manager has and the records this individual has, it's just an unnecessary additional step to avoid that penalty for failing to provide the records, provide the inspection and copying on time. Again, you've got 10 business days to produce those records. If you don't within those 10 business days, not only is there a dollar figure penalty, but now if you do it allegedly intentionally with potential harm to the association or its members, etc., it's now a crime to fail to produce those records. So I just don't know why any director would want to take the risk of being responsible for that, whether it's a current director or former. If it's a former director, then frankly, my perspective is the association should be sending a demand that that director turn over all association property so that the association actually has the records to produce when necessary. So bottom line, is it illegal? No, it's not. Is it stupid? Yeah, probably.
We love your honesty. Cindy in Orlando, can a developer of an HOA that once we pass the 90% sold close delay, the turnover process for months with no reason?
I mean, with no reason, the answer is no. But the problem is the way that a lot of these questions are worded. And I can tell sometimes when it's coming from an owner who's asking a leading question, or from a director asking a leading question, or just an honest question. I want to know the answer. And it's clear that this person believes that, this developer is intentionally refusing to turn over control to the members. If the developer is refusing to schedule the turnover election meeting, then that's something that the association, the members, can try and push them on and force. You probably have to have independent counsel for the association, which I think all developer-controlled communities should have, almost not from inception, but from fairly early on, someone who is not just giving guidance to the developer, but giving guidance from the perspective of someone who regularly represents community associations and understands how all this is supposed to work. So again, it's one of those, well, the answer is it's illegal and it's not appropriate if they're delaying it on purpose, but you may just not know the reasons that it's being delayed. And so unless you send a demand or you ask for that background and that information, you're probably going to be stuck in a position where you have no idea why they're delaying it. And you're going after the developer and saying and making the allegation that it's intentional and that there's no valid reason without having done the investigation is somewhat reckless, in my opinion. I'm not saying it doesn't happen all the time, but it's not the way I would want to practice law, is the way that I would put it.
Okay. I'm going to go to Linda in the chat line. She wants to know if we switch rooms to have more room for the exercise equipment, would that be considered a material alteration? We have an exercise and social room.
So in an HOA, probably not an issue you need to deal with unless your declaration says the vote that's required for material alterations. If it's in a condo, you probably need a vote for something like that. And the reason for that is that you are using different rooms for different purposes and moving all of the equipment. That changes, obviously, not only the practical aspect of those rooms, but the visible aspect. And that's what a material alteration is. So, if you choose not to get it, the members might not care. And, you might not have anyone challenging it. But if someone were to ask me that question, I'd say most likely you need to get whatever vote is in the declaration if you're in a condo. If you're in an HOA, you're probably fine. Now, you should be making the decision during an open meeting, but, beyond that, might not be an issue.
We just had somebody write that they're getting ready to change over from the developer to their HOA. And they wanted to know, what is the process, if you can give a short version?
What's the process of turnover is basically,
Yes.
It's an election. That's literally the turnover. The turnover is the transition of control of the board from the developer to the members. So the whole turnover process is basically one election. The members then get to run the board, or at least control a majority of the seats on the board. Now, you also have a partial turnover potentially, where only one member of the board is actually someone that's an owner within the community that isn't affiliated with the developer. And once that full turnover of a majority of the control in the community is done, the developer has 90 days to produce certain records and information and property of the association to the association. And then, once that's given over, there are a lot of things that an association should be considering. I actually have, I think it's about 15 pages of a letter that I customarily send out to clients that are newly turned over for what they should be considering, what they need to know about the turnover process after it's happened, etc. It's a very simple, straightforward process, but it might entail a lot of complicated issues like looking at potential construction defects, getting an engineer to take a look at your buildings and all of your DRCs, which are your drainage areas, and all the other things that have come along with what the association is obligated to maintain, etc. There are a lot of issues that go into it, but in reality, the straightforward, simple answer is, what's a turnover? It's an election meeting.
Okay. I'm trying some of these. Hey, we love your questions, but some of them I don't quite understand.
Well, Steve, you're always welcome to give it a shot, and we can pray that I can figure it out.
Yeah, I hate doing that to you.
No,
We've
you
got so
don't.
many.
You love it. You love making me squirm and try and figure this
Here,
stuff
here.
out. I see it every single
Let's do
time.
Norman in Altamonte Springs. Do you advocate for 100% transparency with regards to bank statements, invoices, CDs, savings accounts, pretty much everything the board or management does on behalf of the owners, except for legal matters.
So if the only exception you're listing is legal matters, then no, I don't advocate for 100% because a lot of additional records are not subject to inspection by the members according to Florida law. There's a whole list of exemptions, and it's not just attorney-client privileged or attorney work product material. There's an entire list, personal information of the owners and things of that nature. I think there are maybe 12 or 13 different items in condo, HOA, and co-op that are listed in the statute as exempt from production in a request for inspection of official records. Now, when it comes to the financials, yes, 100% transparency is mandated. And I do advocate for it because I want my clients to follow Florida law. But, when it comes to, do I advocate for literally every factor of the association other than legally privileged items? No, I don't, because the statute says that I'm not supposed to, because there are people other than this corporation, the association, that have rights that need to be protected as well. So the financials, yeah, absolutely. Every member is entitled to see the financials, including, by the way, the individual ledgers for every individual owner. Upon request, that is supposed to be produced for inspection and copying. What I advocate to hide is bank account numbers, social security numbers, things of that nature that could be used, login credentials, basically anything the statute protects, I think should be protected, and that there's a reason that the statute protects it. But if we're just talking specifically about, financial reports, yeah, that should be given to the members, unless it's an audit that includes every single document of the association records, in which event, again, statute protects it. And as a result, we need to advise our clients that they need to protect it because they're obligated to.
If you just been, this is I call it the K Bender Rimbom Hour. This is the Ask the Expert show. And at the last Thursday of each month, we have board certified attorney Alan Swartzide. And we are actually just answering your questions that you sent in during the month. And we also have a chat line, we're being barraged with people with questions. Let's go to Kathy in Orlando. She says 4 of 5 board directors want to remove the president to director and a director to president. The current president doesn't consult the board for board decisions. How do we get on the board agenda? How do we get this on the board agenda?
Well, I hate to suggest the sneaky option, but you might consider just saying officer positions as the agenda item. And then you can vote to get the guy off the board or the lady off the board, whatever it may be. The other option is that you schedule your own meeting. The president is generally the one that schedules these meetings, but that doesn't mean they have full authority. If you have a board vote during a meeting and you push and push and push, and this guy won't put it on the agenda, frankly, what you might need to do is just have the vote and let him challenge it. That's some bad legal advice because he might win a lawsuit over whether he should remain president. But I would also argue that the refusal to place this item on the agenda represents a conflict of interest where he is refusing or she is refusing to have the board vote specifically so that he or she remains in power. So you could also say that this person is conflicted out of voting on the issue altogether, given the fact that they've explicitly said, I won't put it on the agenda, or they're just refusing to put it on the agenda and just put it on anyway. This person may be preparing the agenda. That doesn't mean that it can't be amended by another member of the board, especially if this person's conflicted out and doesn't have the right to vote on it. Now, again, a conflict of interest is generally going to be where you've got a financial impact of the decision that's being made. So they might argue it's not a conflict, but then you get even deeper and say, this is a breach of fiduciary duty. You are refusing to perform your obligations as a director and as the president of this association. there are a lot of different ways you could look at it, a lot of different ways you could address it. Unfortunately, none of them are clean and easy. But I think the, officer positions on the agenda, I mean, I'm not going to suggest you lie about what you are planning on voting on, but I've seen it happen. I think it's a bad idea to be not transparent, but that doesn't mean that it's never done in that way. Sneakiness is not illegal.
We're going to go to the chat. We're going to go to the chat line. Penny, how can a multi-condo association handle a handicap parking situation where an owner only moves their vehicle once or twice a month and parks in the handicap spot?
That's a tough one because you're talking about someone who has an obvious, presumably an obvious disability. You really need to talk to your attorney about how to handle that, because if that person is asked for a handicap spot or asked to be permitted to park in a handicap spot, you might assign them a spot, but that creates its own issues, which is why I suggest you probably want to talk to your own attorney about that and get a written opinion, so that at least you have that to rely upon if you end up getting sued for discrimination, which is what it's called when someone with a disability doesn't get what they want. Or more accurately, although in reality it becomes them not getting what they want, it's really they're not getting the accommodation they need in order to properly use your property.
Jack in Oak Ridge, is it true that the board must take a vote on each fine before it imposed on a resident?
So generally, yes. However, if the board has a list of 20 owners that they're proposing to fine, they can vote yes on that entire list at once. So there needs to be at least a consideration of the individual property, but the board can review, the list of here's 20 different lots, here are their violations. We're voting to move all of these forward with fines. That then goes to the fining or hearing committee, etc. So the short answer is yes, they need to vote on it. Whether they need to vote on each individual fine individually, the answer is no, in my opinion. But they do need to vote on each fine, even though they can do it all at once.
Okay. Do you still get many calls about Zoom?
Meaning holding board meetings and member meetings via Zoom?
Yes.
I don't get a lot of questions, although the condo statute changed this year to address some Zoom issues. So I do get questions about how that plays in. And specifically, that was that if you're going to hold a meeting virtually, it needs to be recorded. That recording becomes an official record for a year. It goes up on your association website, etc. So I do get questions about that. But the way that that I have suggested getting around it is just schedule the meeting in person at a location that everyone can access. And then it turns into the meeting's being held in person, but people can attend via Zoom if they want to. So that's really the main question I get about whether or not you can hold meetings via Zoom. The statute's now pretty clear. You can do it. You just have to record the meeting and do a bunch of other things that you didn't have to do.
Well, here's a Zoom question from Ben in Conway. Wants to know, board members must remain on to maintain a quorum. We often have a board member leave during the meeting, often noticeable when there is a roll call vote and no one answers.
I mean, if no one answers, they're not there for purposes of that vote. That doesn't mean they didn't attend or that a quorum wasn't met to hold the board meeting, but it may be an issue that the board can't vote on that particular item. So that's another one I would run by your attorney so that you get an actual answer. But generally speaking, I would say the meeting can still move forward, but if there is no longer a quorum because one person dropped off, you may not be able to vote on anything that they weren't there for.
Here's another Zoom from Larry in Orlando. If a Zoom meeting is held, is a physical location still needed related to the new Florida statute?
Yes, and that's what I just discussed. So if it's being held via Zoom, the statute is pretty clear. You still need a physical meeting location for anyone to attend who wants to. That's why I say just hold it in person, and then you don't need to comply with all the Zoom specific requirements. You just have to have it visible and audible that what's going on at the meeting, rather than having to record it and do XYZ. You just stick with your standard. Okay, well, we got meeting minutes. They'll be approved at the next meeting.
This is from Craig in Forest City. He said, I hope you know that we all appreciate you taking the time each month to answer our questions.
Well, I do
How many support animals are allowed to a unit owner?
Unfortunately, you have to ask the physician that's doing the prescription. There's no specific number. I've seen one of my neighbors, in fact, had, I think, 15 emotional support chickens. Each one has to serve a function, or the number has to serve a function. But, I've seen, this person needs 3 emotional support chihuahuas because they're small and they fit within the definition of what they need, and they are needed for different reasons each. So there's really no specific number, unfortunately, that you can cut it off and say, you know what, enough is enough. What I would do, if you're concerned about whether or not an emotional support animal request or any other accommodation request is something that should be permitted, run it by council. I'd also suggest that you consider having a procedure that your council puts together in writing that the board adopts, so that it's easier for you to do those evaluations. And there's just a list of, here are the things we look at. That way, no one can argue that you're reviewing it differently for one person versus the other. And you are, getting a list of, here's what's required for the board to have to provide this. In other words, members, residents, whoever's coming and asking for this, you know what? This is what you're really going to have to prove. So please, when we ask you for documentation, make sure it covers all this, because otherwise we're going to have to come back. We have what's called an interactive process, and we're going to have to ask you for a better physician's letter, and you're going to have to pay that physician again for another letter, because let's be realistic. 75% of the time when I get an ESA request, you're just paying someone that you met with online. And that may or may not be legally sufficient. It's up to the board whether you want to believe that that physician actually has the qualifications to prescribe the emotional support animal, or actually had enough interaction with this person to determine that they suffer from the disability. But that'd be the short, long answer, is the way I'll put it. Is it really depends on the circumstances, but there's no solid, you can't have more than 3 emotional support animals.
Okay. Ace wants to know, so if the official meeting place is a room, but is being live streamed on Zoom, it does not have to be recorded?
That's my perspective. And you may want to ask your individual counsel so that you don't get in trouble for relying on something you heard on the radio. But my perspective is that the statute is very specific. It's if you are holding the meeting via virtual meeting mechanisms. And if you're holding it in person, and the notice and the agenda say that the meeting will be held in person, but you can attend via Zoom if you want, versus we're holding it virtual, and if you want to attend in person because we're required to provide a physical location, you can also do that. Those are 2 very different concepts, in my opinion. Even though it's the exact same effect, you're not noticing it as a Zoom meeting. So it's a creative interpretation that I would suggest running by your council, your association council, but I haven't seen anyone dinged on it so far.
Well, hate to tell you this, we've come to an end. It's amazing how fast this show goes by. Let's tell people again how they can reach your office.
Sure. Again, AS at Alan Schwartzide at kbrlegal.com is my email address. You can call the front desk and reach any of our offices at 1-800-974-0680.
And for all of you who are writing, what a great guy Alan is.
No
I'm not going to tell him. His head's already big enough as it is. He will be back though with us. next month. Alan, you do the most incredible job. I'm so glad we have you. And hey, have a wonderful, wonderful time before we spend with you next month, the last Thursday of the month at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
That's Alan. It's going to do it for us today. We'll be back again with you next week with more Ask the Experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.